Hello and welcome to this lecture on some of the major Revolutionary War battles. If you're at home listening to this, you have the note guide on Canvas that you need to fill out. And I'm going to go over each of these battles and each of those note things that you need to fill out to know for these 6 battles that we are going to go over. So here we go. The first battle. First, the iCanvas. I can identify 6 major battles during the Revolutionary War, and I can evaluate which battle had the greatest impact on the war. So let's keep going through this. So the first battle we're going to talk about is Lexington and Concord. This is known as the first battle of the American Revolution, and there wasn't supposed to be any fighting here. So what happened? The goal of the British here was to take away guns from the Patriots without firing a shot. The people in Boston were causing lots of issues, as we know. That's why they had the Intolerable Acts. The Bostonians hated the British, and the British were really tired of the Bostonians, and they felt that they were making everything dangerous. So they were going to take the Patriots' guns, and the Patriots like, no, you're not going to take the guns. You can't do that. So they go to a place called Lexington first, and at Lexington, there's a few Patriots known as Minutemen. Their job was to assemble within a minute and be able to fight against the British if they needed. And the British were trying to take their guns, and at some point on April 19th, 1775, someone fired a shot. We're not sure if it's a British soldier or an American patriot, but someone fired a shot. And that day, there were, in the Massachusetts colony, there was 93 American casualties, including 49 killed, and 300 British casualties, including 73 killed and 53 missing. So for your notes, you just need to write down this number. I just want to show you just this big number right here. For American casualties, 93, British casualties, 300. So I'm going to show you the map here. So this is the British, their route right here. What they walked. There you also notice that there is Paul Revere's ride here. So there's 2 guys, and Samuel Dawes. There's 2 men the night before who rode out to these places to warn that the British were coming in to assemble the militias. So Paul Revere went across by a boat and rode his horse all the way to Lexington and then was captured here. And his friend Samuel Prescott finished the ride to go warn Concord. His other friend, Dawes, he rode this way and went through Cambridge and warned the same route the British went after that, went all the way to Concord. Paul Revere was the only one who was captured. But their fight breaks out here, and the militia comes in. They go to Concord, but then they retreat. The British retreat all the way back to Boston. So if you're going to go over who won the Battle of Lexington and Concord, you're going to say it's the American Patriots that won this one, because one, they kept their goal. They defended their guns. They didn't fire without a shot, obviously, but they kept their guns and they pushed the British back, showing, hey, we can push these guys around. So that is the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The leader of the Patriots, or the Minutemen, is named Captain Parker, and he was quoted saying this before the Battle of Lexington: "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." And as we know, the war did begin here, and this is the start of the American War for Independence, though they were not quite fighting for independence yet. The next major battle is the Battle of Bunker Hill. This was only a couple months after Lexington and Concord, and Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill are in Boston. So the Minutemen had taken over these hills, and the British goal is to take Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill back, and the Patriot goal is don't let the British do that. So this is a very famous battle happening on June 17th, 1775 in Boston, as I said, and there are 450 American casualties, including 115 killed and 305 wounded. The British casualties were way more, with 1,054, including 226 killed and 828 wounded. You can see in this picture, This is called this is the death of one of the American officers here that was killed in this battle. One of the major things. Let's see, do we have a map here? No. Why were there so many British casualties? Because the Americans were fortified in the hill, and the British had to walk up to them, and the British were getting hit by all the guns that the Americans were firing behind their fortifications. But they'd be shocked to hear that the British actually are the victors of this battle. One of the reasons is because the Americans were not well armed. They didn't have a ton of guns, they didn't have a ton of ammunition, and the British just kept coming. They kept coming wave after wave. That's why so many were killed and so many were wounded. It's just they just kept coming. And the Americans were eventually forced to retreat, and the British took over Breeds and Bunker Hill, but at a great cost to them. And the leader of the Patriot forces, because they had so little ammunition, they told the soldiers not to fire. And so he said, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. It's because the musket balls that they were shooting could go many different ways, and they didn't want to waste any ammunition. They wanted every shot to hit. So the Battle of Long Island is the next battle. So the British won the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Long Island is now after the Declaration of Independence is signed. And this battle is led by a man named George Washington. And the British goal here is to take over Brooklyn so they can take over New York City. And the American goal is to defend Brooklyn from the British so New York City isn't surrounded by the British. And this results, here's the little map here. So the British come over from Staten Island, and they bring 3 forces. They go to find the Americans here, and the Americans beat them off pretty well. But the British forces and General Howe outflank the American soldiers, get behind their lines, and they end up forcing them this way. And the British troops actually set up camp on Long Island. They set up camp about 200 yards away from the American camp. That's because General Howe was expecting George Washington to surrender. And in effect, if George Washington were to have walked that 200 yards and surrendered, the Revolutionary War would have been over. So what happened that night instead? A fog came in and covered the Americans, and George Washington led a retreat, and they secretly boarded boats and went over into New York City and retreated, and the war continued. A couple months later, the British would take over New York City and would hold New York City for the rest of the war. But the important thing is that Washington and his troops did escape. And George Washington, before the Battle of Long Island, was one to say this: the fate of unborn millions will now depend under God on the courage and conduct of the army. And it really did depend on many Americans' lives, the conduct of the army of the Americans here. So the Americans are in desperate need of a victory. They have been losing a ton to the British. They are not getting well paid. They need a morale boost. That's where this battle comes in, and it's a very famous battle called the Battle of Trenton, because 1, it was a surprise attack, and 2, there's a famous picture that goes with it. So maybe you've seen this. So on Christmas Day, 1776, George Washington and his troops sailed across the Delaware River and attacked a Hessian camp, or a German camp, because this was one of the rivals or one of the allies of the British that they brought to help fight for them. So they cross this river, and they take over this camp. They captured the army that is in Trenton, and the Americans, 2 were killed from exposure, so not even from gunshots from the Hessians, and 5 were wounded. So 7 to 1,000. This is a major victory for the Continental Army, and they and just have a really good, it's a very big morale boost and allows them to continue to fight. So here it shows how the Americans came across this river over here, surrounded Trenton, and forced the Hessians to, some of them would either retreat, but most of them were captured. And this historian was known to say, until Washington crossed the Delaware, the triumph of the old order seemed inevitable. Thereafter, things would never be the same again. So it seemed that the British were just going to take over and all the patriots were going to be hung for their crimes and that everything would remain the same. However, after Washington crossed the Delaware, it seemed things were different. And one of the major battles here is the Battle of Saratoga, which was in 1777. The British goal, they're trying to surround Massachusetts, and now they're trying to go up through New York because they took over New York City, and they're trying to go and control more waterways. There's the Hudson River that they're trying to go up and take over Albany. And the Patriot goal is to keep them out so they don't surround them. And what ends up happening here, it's a battle that lasts for over a month here, and the Americans win. And this is British surrender, and they go back to New York City. The important thing about this battle, though, here's a map of where the British troops tried to come in, and then they were kept out right here. This is where Saratoga is. So they're trying to surround New England so they can surround Boston and take over that area. But the important thing about this battle was this guy right here, Marquis de Lafayette. You may have heard of him in Hamilton, but he was one of the French allies of the Americans, and he's the one who finally convinces the French after the Battle of Saratoga. He convinces the French to support the American side, because you remember the French hate the British, so now the French are going to help the Americans and bring supplies and bring military. So now the Americans, instead of just kind of being a ragtag bunch of people trying to fight for their freedom against a huge army, now they have an actual army from a very powerful country that is coming to help them. And this is going to be really important for the rest of the war. The final battle is kind of went more into the future, called the Battle of Yorktown. And the British goal is to defend Yorktown, and the Patriot goal is to take over Yorktown. And this battle ends in an American victory. The British and Germans suffer heavy casualties, and finally the British commander, General Cornwallis, as we can see here with the white flag, he surrenders. And this battle is known as the end of the Revolutionary War, or the last battle. This is a surrender battle. Here you can see some of the forces surrounding Yorktown. The French had the river, and they surrounded the British and forced them to surrender. And so George Washington is known to say, we must take Cornwallis or all be dishonored. So that was very important to take over this. They forced the British to surrender. The fighting still continued, but after this battle, the British were like, it's not worth our time to try and fight these people anymore. We're losing more money. Remember, we were in so much debt, and now we're losing so much more money. We just need to let them go, and maybe they'll come back to us in a few years. But for now, we just need to let them go do their own thing. And so after this battle, that's what happened. So which battle do you think was the most important in deciding the outcome of the war? Was it the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Trenton, the Battle of Saratoga, or the Battle of Yorktown? Which one do you think? Go ahead and answer that question at the bottom of your assignment, and once you do that, you can turn it in. Hope you have a good day.